Hello everyone, welcome into my YouTube channel Eric Idega, an academic channel. Today I want to take you through information sources. As you are all seeing here, what is this information sources all about? As you are seeing here, information sources, these are materials, records or documents that provide data or knowledge on a particular subject. So, which means that these sources serve as the foundations for research, inquiry, and decision making across all academic, professionals, and everyday contexts. So, you need to know all these anything that provide for you the evidence. It might be the recorded things, it might be the documents, or the data, any data that is will provide for you the knowledge or the information about something. That is where you are getting your information from. It is what we are meaning the information sources. Apart from that one, what is this? What are the contents of these information sources? And in our today's contents about the information sources that we are going to be we will go through is what are the types of the information sources, the characteristic of each type of the information sources. We have the example of each type of the information sources. Now let us go through what are those types of the information sources. As we are all seeing here types of information sources, the information sources consist of two types mainly, and namely we have primary source and the secondary source. There is no any tertiary source or any other source, but there are only two. And what are they mean? For the case of the primary source, here the primary source is the direct or the first-hand piece of information or evidence created at the time of the events or by someone who was directly experienced or who was in that event, and that is what we call primary source. And to make it more understandable, it should not be altered or interpreted by others or stand as an mediated piece of information. Remember that for the information to be the primary source, it should be from the source where that things was happening, or it should be provided by someone who was there at that time. So which means that no one should interpret it and no one should translate it into a mass media forms. So if somebody is translating or interpreting, it will automatically not be a primary source. Now, what are those examples of those primary sources? So the examples of the primary source of informations are here. For the best way of understanding it, for me, I like abbreviating the things. So those examples I have made them into a short forms called coders. This means that the first example is creative works, and these creative works, it might be a novels, poem, or artwork created during a particular period. For example, Shakespeare's plays. And another example under the creative work is this creative work may be a songs or a music compositions from a specific era, and that is under creative work. Another one is oral histories and interviews. This is one of the most example of primary sources of informations. And what are under these oral histories and interviews? This may be testimonies or interviews with individuals which is directly involved in oral witnesses to the events. And it might be an ethnographic field work where the researcher interacts with the community directly. That is under oral histories and interviews. And another example for primary sources that we should know them is here. We have what we call documents. Under the documents, remember that not all the documents, and these are the things that we should know under the document. Those documents must be the historical documents. For example, we have the Buganda Agreement of 1900 with the British, or it might be the official records like the census data. And another documents might be the legal documents such as the court cases or the government legislations. And another things we have to know under the document is personal letters, diaries, and many others. And the next thing is newspaper and oral magazine. Those things also, they must be published at the time of the event for them to be under primary sources. And the next primary sources, the example is what we call artifacts. And these artifacts may be tools like clothing and everyday objects from a specific culture or historical period. For example, pottery from ancient Greece. These are example of artifacts, which is under the example of primary sources. And the last example is scientific data. For the scientific data, the example we have raw data from scientific experiments. For example, the original laboratory notes or field studies. We have data sets from surveys or experiments that have not yet been analyzed or interpreted. And the next is an architecture such as the pyramids of Egypt or medieval castles. And these are the example of the primary sources. And for you to master them very well, just use the short form of CODAS, where C stands for creative works, O stands for oral histories and interviews, D stands for documents, A stands for artifacts, and S is for scientific data. And that is our example of the primary sources of information. And we know that these primary sources of information also do have the characteristics. Now let us look at the nature or the characteristics of these primary sources. The characteristics of the primary sources. And again, for the easiest mastering, I have made it into a short forms, which is called root. As we are all seeing, for the root, we have raw data, originality, unmediated evidence, time related. And as if we are to explain this one, what is the raw data means? This raw data, it is a primary source of which presents raw and filtered informations. As I said, raw data, it is the primary source of informations, presents raw and filtered informations as one of the characteristics of these primary sources. And the next characteristic is that primary sources are original. So here is saying originality, which means that these sources of information is the first to be provided for the particular events, and they should not be altered, and they should be direct records. They should not be interpreted by any other persons. And the next characteristic is that primary sources are unmediated evidence. There is no interpretations or analysis from another person. The source itself is the evidence, as we all know. And the last characteristic is that primary sources is time related. This means that It is closely tied to the moment in which they were created, which means that all the information that will be got, it will be get at that time, at the immediate time where those events were taking place. And these are our example of primary sources. And as I told you earlier, the sources of information is not only one, there were two. And one of them is primary source, and the next one is secondary sources. Now, let us go and also look at the secondary sources of informations. Here is the secondary sources of informations. Secondary sources of informations, by the definitions, it is the one that interprets, analyzes, or summarizes primary sources or events. Remember, for these secondary sources to come, primary sources must happen first, so that it should be interpreted, analyzed, or summarized. And it is the one step removed from the original material and often provides a broader perspective or critical insight into a primary data, as we all know. And these secondary sources, what are their examples? So here are the examples of the primary sources. Like I told you earlier, I have made this example into a short form which is called DJB. By mastering this one, DJB, we have all the info of those examples are here. Like for where for D we have documentaries as number one example of the secondary sources. These documentaries are films or videos that tell the story of historical events or individuals. And the next example is journal articles. These journal articles, they should be the one that critiques or analyze primary data such as research papers. And the next thing is books. These books may be historical books that analyzes a specific historical period or events. And the next example is essays and reviews. These essays and reviews, they might be critical essays that provide analysis of a historical event, often building upon primary texts. And these essays and reviews might be movie or book reviews that interpret the contents of a work. And the last example of this primary source or secondary source we have is encyclopedias. These encyclopedias, these are entries in encyclopedias that summarize well-established knowledge or events based on the secondary research. For example, Britannica or Wikipedia. As I said, all these are examples of secondary sources. And for the easier mastering, just say it DJB, where D stands for documentaries, J stands for journal articles, B stands for books, E is for essay and review, and then the next E is for encyclopedias. And these secondary sources also have their characteristics. Now, let us look also their characteristics in preference to primary sources. Now, these secondary sources, their characteristics here, I have made it into a short forms. We have 4 characteristics. Here, I have made it into a short form called SETI, where S stands for summary. What does it mean? Secondary sources summarize informations often made from the primary sources. And the next characteristic is it is evaluative. As we all know, they offer opinions or assessments based on the evidence that may be drawn from primary sources. And the next characteristic is contextual. These secondary sources help to frame or contextualize primary data within a broader trends or movement or history. And the last characteristics here is interpretative. As we all know, these secondary sources involve some level of analysis, critics, levels of analysis, synthesis, or evaluations of primary sources, and they explain or critique the primary sources or the event that is present. And those are what I have for you today, and I wish you well in nice learning. If you did not get me well, all these are in my videos and I have made it into a slide form. You can go through over them and master them very well. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.